What's up, everybody? Welcome to the SumerSports Show. Lindsay Rhodes and Thomas Dimitrov, and a few special guests joining us today as we close in on the trade deadline. This is going to be a trade deadline preview show. It is, of course, next Tuesday. Thomas, we're going to try and figure out today which teams are buyers, which teams are sellers, and which specific players might be the ones to move on. We are calling in the big guns from Sumer Sports this week to contribute to this conversation. We've got Shawn Syed from Stats and Scheme Podcast. We've got Sam Bruchhaus from the Sumer Daily Pod. They've been picking over the tape. They've been picking over the numbers. They have been doing all of this in an effort to try and nail this thing down. But before we welcome them in, Thomas, you have been clear before that these moves are not easy moves to make. What do you think are the biggest challenges that teams are facing in this way at this point?
How in they are as a head coach and a general manager, the team builders. But make no mistake about it. If your owner is behind you and saying, yes, you can sell in the hopes that we'll continue to build this over the next 2 or 3 years, that's one thing. It's very complicated to be a seller, even though you know you need to be. If your owner's hanging you out there and they're not supporting you, that becomes very dicey. Even if your general manager has been told in the quiet alleys of the hallways that, hey, you're fine. And then the head coach hears you talking about moving away some talented players because you need to sell. Man, that's a big thing for a head coach. All of a sudden, the relationship between the head coach and the GM gets a little bit testy and dicey. It sounds odd because normally you're along well, but there becomes a little bit of paranoia in it. So it becomes, you have to make sure you're clearly communicating with your team builders and your ownership group during this time.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense that would become testy, right? For a head coach who's like, I need all the pieces that I could possibly get in order to try and win games and prove that I can do this. And you're going to take those away from me. The Saints are a team, and we'll get into like who the sellers should be or who we think that they are. The Saints are a team that has come up obviously from a standing standpoint. They look like a team that could be a seller, but Dennis Allen said yesterday that they are not looking to sell. So is that wishful thinking? Is that are they in alignment there? That's a question that we'll have answered over the course of the next week. With regards to the buyers, because I think it makes sense to start a conversation about where pieces might go with who are the teams that are in it and might decide to go all in, and where are the holes on their roster, where could they use an upgrade. And so then we can kind of figure out who the players are that they might try. Do you think a GM must see that tells him this is a year where it's worth it to go bring these pieces in and let's go all in, and not in a Jerry Jones sort of all in way, but like a real one?
Well, I think the big thing is making sure that in your discussions with your general manager and your head coach and your staffs, you have to feel the momentum. You have to feel that you're continuing to get better and better, and you're tapping into all the potential that you have. There has to be momentum going in the right way, even if you're 40-something%, and our guys will talk about it here soon, or even 35%, Lindsay, like, I want to see that. I want to say, like, we can get over a hump here and get us in the playoffs with the acquisition of A, B, and C, or whatever it may be. There has to be hope. There has to be consistency. There has to be an understanding and an energy within that building to know that we're not just flailing around buying and giving away draft booty for next year because we think we just want to get ready for next year. This is about long term. It's about getting in the playoffs, yes, but it's also about building into the future. So to me, you have to view it as it's a double-edged sword, or it's double-sided. Now, help us now to get in the playoffs, and it's going to be an important move for us to grow into the future.
Yeah. And even then, even if there's a guy out there, like sometimes there are complications in getting this done, as you pointed out before. Like you might have a need, there might be a guy available, the contract has to be right, the comp has to be right. There are a lot of different layers that go into this, and we're going to try and check as many of those boxes here on this show as we possibly can. And we're going to bring in Shawn Syed to help us with the who are the buyers question. He's put a lot of time and effort into trying to come up with an answer there, and has come up with a list of a few teams that make particular sense to him. Hi, Shawn.
Hey, Lindsay. When I think of this trade deadline, sometimes I think, oh, well, we're not going to maybe see an exciting like Max Crosby or Myles Garrett type move, but there's still teams that can fill kind of small holes that can go a really, really long way. For me, I think that the Lions are absolutely a team that they're really going to have to make a move, as particularly at that defensive end spot. And the second team in my mind, it's the Baltimore Ravens. I think after watching that game against the Browns, where, we can go back and forth and are the problems in the secondary? Is it up front? You watch Jameis Winston really be able to kind of hang out in the pocket and have as much time as he wanted. That feels like a situation where, you get a little bit of drop off from all those pass rushers. Now you really need to bring in an edge player, maybe one that's worn a Ravens jersey before, in Jadeveon Clowney, to that spot.
I want to back up to the Lions part. I think the Ravens, you're totally right, and let's get to that. The Lions are obviously a team that a lot of people are talking about. The second that Hutchinson went down, they haven't made a move yet. There was a moment yesterday where Dan Campbell jumped up and down in response to, like, could a move be made? He kind of walked that back today by saying that we shouldn't read too much into that was just him. A reporter asked the question a second time and he jumped up and down just to see if that would get him off of it. I don't know if I'm buying that, because it was a specific jump up and down, Thomas. Like, you jump up and down anyway, whatever. But the Lions, they've been so good in those 2 games since Hutchinson went down. So you could argue from the outside, like, do we need to make this move? Why do you feel strongly that they probably should still?
It still feels like this is a defense that they're going to be predicated on, can we force a turnover, play a lot of man coverage, and be tight to routes in that way. But when you think of an Aaron Glenn defense, they want to get on you. They want to be able to pressure you. And I just worry in the long term a little bit when they're going to have to keep on blitzing to generate pressure, as opposed to getting some of that pressure with just 4 rushers, where you're allowed to do a little bit more kind of fun stuff on the back end. And again, it's not just hey, we need to trade every single pick we've ever had for Max Crosby. It's adding a rotational rusher, where you think of a guy like Za'Darius Smith who can come in and have immediate production. So it's just shoring up that rotation, because this is a team that I expect to be playing in New Orleans late in the season. So you want to just have those small additions that can hopefully go a long way when you're playing some of these just tighter games down the road.
Wait a minute. Did you just say they're going to be playing late, as in the Super Bowl? You just made a categorical comment. Is that what Shawn Syed said?
I certainly feel like it when I look at the rest of the NFC, when you think about how things have shaken up in the NFC North, between just injuries, between the Vikings now going to take a little bit of a step back. Everyone's looking up to the Lions. I think that's, I don't feel particularly controversial saying that one, Thomas, where the Lions are a fantastic offense, like absolutely incredible in what they do, how they do it. And they even have Jared Goff playing well, where, didn't have the best game against the Titans, but just a team that is so fun to watch on a week-to-week basis. And because they're that good, that's what makes me feel so strongly like, hey, let's add just one last piece, where Brad Holmes has done such a good job building this roster year over year. Put the chips on the table. It's easy for me to say, Thomas. I know it's been different for you when you have so many other things to kind of stress you out, kind of in different directions. But I mean, the windows are small. I want to see them take the shot.
It's a great point. Very quickly, Lindsay. So on that note, Za'Darius Smith, you think about someone like that. Does that guy? I know your point is he just gets you over the hump. But do you need that down the stretch? Because look, there are quarterbacks out there going to need to be pressured hard. Let's just say, hypothetically, there's playoffs going on and they're dealing with the Atlanta Falcons and they're not getting the rush they need on Kirk Cousins. Can they get it done by what they have without, their pass rusher extraordinaire, obviously, who's injured? I just don't know if that's going to get him over the hump defensively.
No, I mean, what about what you've seen from them in the last couple of weeks? Like, without that. So if they can even upgrade off of what they've had for the last couple of weeks, it feels like, I mean, it's no Aiden Hutchinson. You're not going to find an Aiden Hutchinson because Mark Davis is sending emails telling people that guy's not available. So apparently we can't get Crosby away from the Raiders. But at this point, you have to look at them. They're plus 100 in terms of net scoring this year. Number one in the NFL by a lot. I want to say that the Bills are second at plus 84. We've talked before about how that's a sticky stat relatively. I mean, it fluctuates throughout the season. But they're looking really good. And so if you can upgrade just even at all, why wouldn't you want to do that?
I guess what I'm wondering too quickly is, okay, do you make a bigger move And can you ever get Trey Hendrickson out, Shawn?
I mean, that would be a real dream scenario. When you start to look at the Bengals, like they've really faltered a little bit, of course, losing that last game to the Eagles. I think the Bengals probably still believe that they can pull off, 7 wins in a row and go ahead and make the playoffs. Right. I'm glad you mentioned that, though, because coming into the season, we look at the Lions roster and say, you know what? They could use an edge rusher. So it might be a situation where, how often are we seeing these young kind of edge rushers traded? Not that often, but this could be a situation where you do kind of, bounty up a little bit and you throw those picks out there because you're making a trade for a player, hopefully getting an agreement in place. And now you have that player for the long run where come next year, Hutchinson comes back, you have a second edge rusher. And now, with some of the improved play inside with Ali McNeil and DJ Reader, now you're looking at a front four that is really scary going forward for the Lions.
And Lindsay, worried about the stat underneath there. Can you comment on that? 28th, 15th to 28th, right? That's where my concern is. Is it enough to get a midliner?
Well, I mean, I guess, okay, so I'm picking up your point more in just that you're not a big fan of the Za'Darius Smith ad. Like that what you would have to give up is not necessarily, he's not worth it in terms of solving your problem to the degree that you would need it.
It's funny because I just think I love where Detroit is going to. They're going to lose their offensive coordinator, their special, extraordinary offensive coordinator, right? We know that. Is this an all-in time, Lindsay and Shawn, is what I'm saying. So do you go out and do it? And then next year you come there and you have two of the most amazing pieces rushing the passer. You're not doing it all for naught, right?
100%. I mean, we said this a few weeks ago, right? When we were talking about Max Crosby. Like if there was a team out there for whom it would be worth it to send 2 firsts or whatever it takes to get a guy of Max Crosby's caliber. Again, I'm backing off of that just because Mark Davis has apparently made it clear to people that he's untouchable. So if Max Crosby's untouchable, then who is that guy that's really that changes your roster for years moving forward and also for this year? And so in the absence of that, can you just get a slight upgrade so that you're not 28th and maybe split the difference? Because they're still killing teams with that 28th ranking there that you're talking about. So they might not need that 15th. They might not need the pressure rate that they were getting with Hutchinson in order to even potentially win the Super Bowl. I'm not sure, but I would still try. I would try because I do think that this is definitely a year where the Lions have a roster that they could win it all. I want to talk about another team, Shawn, that you mentioned already with the Ravens that I think clearly has a roster that can win it all, but also has a pretty obvious deficiency in terms of their pass defense. I'm going to pull up some of the stats here about the Ravens, because one of the things that I think is interesting about trying to decide to be a buyer is I think it's helpful personally if it's a real obvious specific need, right? Like I'm pulling up Tampa Bay, for instance. They've got needs all over the defensive side of the ball. Like I can't zero in on one specific player that would fix their defense. But in a lot of ways, the Ravens feel like it's clearly the pass defense. Like this is the run defense is amazing. The offense is amazing. Their defensive echo rate is 55%. And of course, for people who don't know what an echo rate is, that shows us the percentage of quality possessions that a team has, either because they have a big play touchdown or a first down inside the opponent's 40-yard line. So it's essentially like scoring opportunity. And that's the 7th worst defensive echo rate in the NFL. They're allowing the most yards per game, and they're doing that with the best run defense in the league. They cannot stop the pass, though. They're allowing the most passing yards per game. They have the 4th worst EPA per pass allowed. On the surface, this looks like a secondary issue, but is it possibly a pass rush issue? They have the 8th lowest pressure rate, and they're tied for the 4th slowest get off. So this looks like we have to fix the pass defense. What's the best way to do that in your mind?
For me, I look at that edge spot because I'm going to give them a chance to let their cornerbacks get healthy. Of course, between Wiggins, between Humphrey, if you're able to just get healthy everywhere, that makes things better. And when I just look at, again, that Browns game, it was a little bit of Jameis Winston can do whatever he wants in the pocket. He's really able to hang out there. And you look at the numbers last year where you're 9th in pressure rate, and now you're dropping to that 25, 26 range. That is really, really tough for a team that I feel so strongly about this offense and how Lamar Jackson, how they've sort of evolved in the last 2 years. It's tough when you look at that defense that is so built to really handle things right down the middle at that safety spot, at that linebacker spot, at that interior defensive line. But same with the Lions. I just worry you're going to hope that this team is playing against the Chiefs. You're going to hope they're playing against the Bills, the Texans late in the season where they had a lot of success against the Bills at that edge rusher just from a production level. It just feels like week over week, that makes me a little bit uneasy where when you have that dominant pass rush, it makes everyone's life so much easier. It just has so many positive effects down the line through the back end of the defense that it makes me hope that they make a move at that edge rusher spot.
And so Thomas, to follow up on his point there about this past week, just looked it up. Jameis Winston's time to throw on Sunday was 4.23.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. Wow. Okay, you're looking at all of this, Lindsay, and Shawn, I want to ask you this. So as a team builder and a GM, so Eric DeCosta is sitting down there. He's sitting down there with John Harbaugh, and they're talking about it outside. They're saying, okay, we can make a big splash here, whatever that big splash is. It's giving away draft, trade, comp, whatever it may be. Right now, are we doing that? This is a good edge rush draft class coming up, right? This is where my mind goes. Okay, do we splurge here now, or do we wait, continue to invest, which we know we're not going to need to do as far as pass rush? How do we navigate that? Like, how do you say, is there a cutoff? Like, well, we'll give away a 4th or a 5th or whatever it is to get a midliner, or we giving away a 1 or a 2 so that it does affect our draft, and all of a sudden we're out of the legit pass rushers. There may be 5 to 7 pass rushers going in the first round, edge rushers. We might be passing that up if we're giving away what we want to do right now because we're worried about the here and now.
What do you think, Shawn?
Yeah, I certainly worry about just mid-season kind of huge splash moves, just because when you think of, all right, well, how many of them are really hitting? What is even the contract that you're going to have to probably sign a person if they're just on a new deal? And the Ravens certainly expect to be picking in the back half of the first round. Are the edge rushers even going to make it there? That is also what gives me concern. But I think you have to be able to reflect in your room, in that edge rusher room. Are you able to just kind of pass rush as a whole entire unit where you're creating production, maybe more at the interior? Maybe it's, we're going to send our linebackers a little bit more, drop those edge rushers out. But you make such a good point when you look at that draft class. I just worry, how many of those guys are going to pass back to the second half of the first round? Because when I look at the list of teams, like everyone could use an edge rusher. Every single person could use one of these just unbelievable athletes. So it makes me feel like a lot of these teams are going to be banking on that early in the first round as well.
So the one thing that I'm hearing about with regards to the draft and the pass rush is that it's such a deep class. So you're right that there might be some higher end guys, but also on Thomas, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It feels like kind of like quarterback, but maybe to a lesser degree. Like this feels like one that sometimes we get wrong. Sometimes we guess wrong, and it's harder to project whether or not a pass rusher is going to transition to the NFL and the skill set that we think we're going to see, we actually see. So that depth, you might get a guy at the back end of the first round. If there is depth at this position, if they find somebody that's the right fit for their defense, then you might still be able to get exactly the right guy a little bit later in a class like this.
And that's a great point. Historically, there are a lot of mistakes, and you know this, Shawn, over the years at pass rush, edge rush guys. Just because you see great athletes like Vic Beasley, and I'll raise my hand there. I think Vic did well in our Super Bowl year, and then he plummeted and he's out of the league, right? He's buffed up, great athlete. They're not that easy to get just because they can get up and around the corner, look athletic, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot into that. What I'm saying is I don't think, Shawn, necessarily, without getting off on a tangent here, there are a lot of maybe top 5. You're right. All of a sudden there's a run on them. They don't get back to the back end of where potentially Baltimore will be. What are they going to do about it? And the last thing I'd say about this is when you're thinking about this and you're saying there is a little bit of the next man up, Lindsay. There's a little bit of when you're sitting in there, especially the Harbaughs, right? The Harbaugh brothers, tough ass dudes. They were raised in football families. They want to see how people are responding. Like you said, they're looking at scheme, who in the building can step up and do their job. Let's see what happens with that. I mean, to sit there and say we're just going to go out and pick a really big player up. And the other thing is, Shawn, it's not easy. We're just talked about that. We're not getting Max Crosby, and there's probably a great chance we're not getting, we're surely not getting Cincinnati. I don't think Cincinnati ever trades inside the division. So what are they doing? Who's out there? Yeah.
That's the tough one here. Who is the right fit? Have you said a right fit? I know we heard Za'Darius Smith's name a little bit earlier when we were talking about the Lions. Who would you think is the right guy for the Ravens?
I mean, I'd love to see Jadeveon Clowney back there. I know it's like a little bit weird. Like, hey, you just played there. He's familiar with the system. I do think that Baltimore does a good job with their system overall of making it, compared to everyone else, I think a little bit easier to learn just in streamlining their teaching process. But love to see Clowney there. I think that you have Carolina that they might be happy to get some draft capital there. I think Thomas makes a lot of good points there, but wouldn't mind seeing Jadeveon Clowney back in some purple.
Well, and that might be a comp that is a little bit more amenable, right? Like a guy who fits the system and can help you out at a position that you maybe have a weakness. But I mean, how much would you have to give up to get Jadeveon Clowney at this point in his career?
It's a really good point, and I don't know where we go with that. Maybe one of those listeners who's knocking on your door to comment to you might have that answer. I'm not sure, but I'm Shawn. While we're waiting for that, I mean, Lindsay, what do you do there? How much do you truly give up on a guy like Clowney? What is that? What is that going to be? We have our own Sumer tool, right? Where we can pull it up and find out what Sumer is suggesting, which we do often.
So if it's Za'Darius Smith, who, so I don't think that we have Clowney ready to go, but for a guy like Za'Darius Smith, just to keep this all in perspective, the trade comp pulls up Everson Griffin, when he went from the Cowboys to the Lions, and the comp there was a 6th round pick.
That seems a little light. Come on, Shawn.
However, how about Joshua Uche just went
light too?
Yeah.
Joshua Uche just went to the Chiefs for a 2026 6th. Like, I mean, I don't even why even make that deal?
I agreed with Bill Belichick. He was pretty outspoken about that being light once again. So he keeps taking his digs at the Patriots. I get that, but it felt light to me. So I don't know. I'd be interested to get your take there, stat guru.
I think that it's going to depend on, are you comfortable giving up a 5th, maybe even a 4th, just for a situation where, are you going to sign that guy long-term? Probably not. Baltimore is more than happy to let some of those edge rushers walk. I think that you have to calculate, are you really going to do it this year? Like, are you really going to take that shot this year? I do think, we look at the Smith. I think it could be comparable to Clowney. So I think maybe you pick up the call, you ask, you throw the 6th out there, and if you're able to get that same situation as that Uche trade, then you feel like, hey, we made out like bandits on this one.
And oftentimes, Lindsay, just so you know, when we start talking about in this time when we're trying to make a push and we are considering the buying side, we're like, oh man, a 6th, 7th, even a 5, it's not that big of a deal, right? We start justifying those kind of moves. They do make a lot of difference when you start getting into draft preparation. But this time of year, you're cashing it out saying, man, we need to continue to progress here. There's a great opportunity here. So
for sure. And if you're the Ravens and you're looking at the Chiefs over here, already undefeated, and on the surface, it kind of looked a few weeks ago like, man, if there's a year that we're going to knock off the Chiefs, it's probably this year. And yet they continue to win. And they're also making a bunch of lower end moves, kind of solidifying areas that they see as weaknesses. I mean, you bring in D-Hop, and now your wide receiver core is, even if he's not the D-Hop of like 5 years ago, now you got somebody who is, an ex-receiver that can win in a bunch of ways and maybe open things up for other people at the very least. And then you bring in Uche and you solidify your team in that way. Like, you've got to be sitting there if you're the Ravens and going, we can't just keep letting the Chiefs make all of these moves in this year where we have a team. And by the way, like I said earlier, like, I think, again, if you're the Bucs and you've got a bunch of holes on defense, and it's like, I mean, I don't know, are you putting Band-Aid on like the dike, metaphorically, right? Like the water, you're trying to get it from coming through. But in the Ravens case, it just feels like you might just be a slight upgrade away, because the defense looks really good in one way and the offense looks incredible. So if I'm the Ravens, I do make a move this year. Because you got to, at some point, you got to go for it. And I understand the team building. I'm all for building smartly. But I think that they are one of the teams that I would absolutely isolate in a down year for the AFC. It looks like there's only a handful of teams that can really make a run. And I would go all in.
And Lindsay, like, to that point, and back to my earlier comment, like, our listeners, and listeners out there, I mean, is this a big topic of conversation? Is it heavy in the in the world of social? Like, are there a lot of comments in this area? Like, hey, just go out and sell, buy. They're not considering the other sides of what are on people's minds and organizations' minds, or what?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people with opinions about what they should do. If you're a Ravens fan and you're watching, hit us up in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts about what you would like your team to do and whether or not you do want to make some of these roster building sacrifices in order to bring somebody in midseason. Is there anybody else, Shawn, that you think should be in the mix here for a team to make a move that is a buyer?
I was going back and forth in my head. I would love, I mean, for the Packers to add an edge rusher. I think that'd be fun. I don't see them really, super anxious to make a move. I was thinking about, I don't know, is a team like the Commanders, like, are they going to maybe make a move for a receiver when you start to think about them looking kind of forward? I feel like maybe not. It feels like I also look at the Eagles, where watching their film against the Bengals, I still think they would want just a little bit more juice from the edge rusher spots. I mean, maybe don't feel super strongly about a team that, hey, I need this team to make a trade, but certainly a lot of different units that I think could use small pieces that could help them in the short run and then in the long run going forward as well.
Can we talk teams looking for pass rushers, by the way? How many times have we said edge rusher specifically?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, Lindsay, like, where do we really think the Commanders are? I mean, in that situation, they're thriving right now. Everything is cool about them. It was so exciting to see Dan jumping around on the field. I honestly had tears in my eyes. Think about that. That's kind of goofy, but just watching him, I feel for him. I mean, unbelievable play. Well, don't even get into talking about the Bears and what happened with that. But the fact that they pulled that off and the excitement, everything is moving in their direction. With that said, do you continue to add pieces, to your point, Shawn, with Dan Quinn and the Commanders, because you just keep building, because this is rare that you get this much momentum. When Dan Quinn started his first year with us in Atlanta, by the way, I can't remember what I was. We went 8-0 or 6-0. We were rolling, and then we plummeted. It was a tough deal. So it's on Dan's mind. Like, let's keep the generated momentum. I just don't know how far you go in that, when you're like, hey, this is good enough. Even if we get in the playoffs, we've really done a really good job. That's what enters my mind as a former general manager. Like, let's not get too greedy, but maybe this is a time to get greedy.
My guess is, and Shawn, I'd love for you to weigh in on this. By the way, your podcast partner, Tej Seth, who's one of my favorites, hi Tej, has chimed in the comments and says that he wants and needs an edge rusher to the Lions. So thank you very much for chiming in here. He's a Lions fan. But with regards to the Commanders, they pop in every offensive way. Like, you want to pull up an advanced stat, there's the Commanders at the top in a way that is shocking to me, has shocked me, because I kind of thought at the beginning of the year, like, I don't know if this has staying power or there's some weird things here. Like, I've already told you, and I'm just going to give up on it. Like, they're fine with Terry McLaurin. Every week I pull up his chart and it's just all routes on the left side, just the left side. And I don't understand why it's working, but it's working. And so I'm just going to let that be, because it continues to work. But the defensive side of the ball is the one that I think would potentially be a hang up for them if it were playoff time. Do you think that, Shawn, that they have a profile of a team that would want to add some pieces? Or do you think, I think Thomas brought up some good points there. You've got a rookie quarterback. Are you playing with house money? Do you just build smartly in the draft?
Yeah, I lean a little bit more towards, hey, let's, keep our draft capital. Let's keep on building through that. Of course, the quarterback on a rookie deal means that they're really going to be able to fill it up even more in free agency this year. I could see them, maybe they, make a few extra phone calls just at the receiver spot if you're going to add someone there. Though I do think Cliff Kingsbury's done a really good job getting into heavy personnel. You can get some receivers off the field and play a little bit of kind of smash mouth football. And then, Dan Quinn's defense, it's going to be attacking. It's going to be at you. It's going to try and force turnover. So, even with some of the cornerback play, do I expect them to make a move? I feel like I'd lean probably a little bit towards the no. Just, they can kind of stand pat with the way that they're playing. Hopefully, you continue to just rise and rise with Jayden Daniels, and then go into the offseason really confident about what you have at that quarterback spot. And now every decision can be made around that rookie contract.
However, Lindsay, if Dan Quinn and Adam Peters are looking for the crystal hardware, so to speak, meaning coach of the year and EOY, executive of the year, they are my choices right now. Not that they're thinking that way, but in my mind, I'm thinking that way. I'm like, they're heading in that direction, and it's great to see what they're doing. This is where the big people and the big decision makers can make a blockbuster sort of idea move. That's why we were also talking about Max Crosby going there. He's not going there. But in my mind, I thought, you talk about Dan Quinn salivating over someone that would be ideal given his personality. I think it would be amazing. But I get your point. I think deep down, they need to hang. I don't want to beat it up, but that's how I'm feeling.
I mean, we're just going to continue to bang the table for this Max Crosby trade, even though it's not going to happen, right? Like, because it's such an obvious, like, this is the guy. If you are going to go all in any way. And let's discuss whether or not that even makes sense. And I know that there's also so just to pass along really quickly because we're live, Adam Schefter is reporting that the Colts have benched Anthony Richardson. So there's a separate conversation for us to have with regards to that. But and in fact, but first though, hold on. Before we say goodbye to Shawn, try and keeping this as compact as possible. Let's put the Max Crosby stuff back up there because I do want to ask whether or not so the comp is obviously huge, right? Like this is a 2 firsts kind of a deal. Is there anything, Thomas, that you think a team could do if you're like the Lions, for instance, or somebody else that could come to the Raiders and change their mind? And again, I don't want to belabor a point. Raiders fans are like, please stop talking about this. We want him here. I get it. I totally get it. But I also wonder if it isn't possibly, and you see the trade comp there at the bottom of your screen, right? For Frank Clark here. If it isn't in the best interest of the Raiders. Because at some point, you need so many things. And you can, if you collect a bunch of draft capital, go build up that quarterback. Now have an asset to get to a quarterback. And then eventually, at some point, building your roster the right way, you could bring in a defensive, an edge rusher like Crosby. Maybe not Crosby, but somebody like that with one of your draft picks also, and now get him on a rookie deal so that you can spend in free agency. It has kind of a cyclical effect, doesn't it?
It does. I keep coming back to the fact that Tom Telesco is a general manager there. And I think Tom has taken, his background, of course, Colts, background of being fairly conservative. I don't know if in his mind he's thinking this is the best thing to do to get rid of someone who is of such stature. I get the building side of him. I'm sure that he and probably the guy that's never going to invite you and I to Vegas in his suite because of all of our talk about Max Crosby leaving there. But I just don't see that organization right now, after trading a legitimate receiver, it just continues to send messages that I don't think Tom would agree to do as a true football person. It is complicated. I just don't see it. As much as I would love to see it happen, 2 picks, I don't know what Detroit could ever do with it, to be honest with you. I think it's too complicated. And by the way, you told everyone in the history of all of this that people are going to be driving their cars into the bay. That's a big deal.
That is a big deal. That is a big deal. Fans would maybe riot. So we don't want that. Shawn, do you have any thoughts about Max Crosby that you think need to be said, or are we just going to put this one to bed?
Yeah, would be a lot of fun. I will say it would be a lot of fun. But yeah, certainly from the Raiders perspective, I'm just not sure how you kind of justified your fan base. Hey, we're going to move on from a player that really can just continue to be a franchise cornerstone.
I keep saying we're going to move on. And then I keep belaboring points here. If we're talking so much about Max Crosby, why is Myles Garrett's name not coming up as much? Because he's in a similar situation with a team that clearly kind of needs to like blow some stuff up, right? To start rebuilding. I mean, that contract for the quarterback that is maybe not going to play quarterback moving forward feels problematic. So does he feel like a luxury that you can no longer afford there in Cleveland?
When you have a player that is that good, it is just so hard for me to think, hey, we're going to trade this player. Like Myles Garrett is sometimes when I'm watching on film, like I have to readjust my eyes if he's actually moving at like 1.5 speed or if I'm missing something. I just don't see it. Of course, every team is going to have a price where, hey, there's just too much capital to get, but you draft and kind of accrue that capital so you can draft players like Myles Garrett, or so you can end up having a Max Crosby. So it just feels like there is that tipping point where it's really going to be hard, I think, even for a team that is in a rough situation kind of going forward in a few different ways. You have Myles Garrett where your defense is still able to be strong, and now you continue to move forward where, hey, they can be a little bit competitive when you have Jameis Winston there.
I would love to see, and you guys can quote me on this, Myles Garrett to the Atlanta Falcons. Why would that not happen? Why would Raheem Morris, given the defensive coach that he is, They're not having luck. And we didn't have luck. For some reason, Atlanta does not have luck drafting and acquiring pass rushers.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a guy to get him over the hump. It's a lot of money.
I mean,
a lot of comp.
Have been begging for them to use one of those first-round picks on a pass rusher, but they keep insisting on using them on low-value positions that are very, very good, but clearly aren't getting them over the hump. I'm talking about tight end and running back there.
Yep.
They do, by the way, the Falcons have the 6th worst echo rate of 58%, the lowest pressure rate, the lowest sack rate, have the 4th lowest get-off time. So I mentioned it's helpful if a team has a specific profile that points to one thing that could help their defense. And in this case, the Falcons are a good example of a team that just clearly needs a pass rusher. That's what all of the numbers would point to. Shawn, Syed, you're the best. Thank you so much for hanging with us for so long. Everybody go check out the Stats and Scheme podcast with Shawn and Tej Seth, who chimed in from a Lions fandom standpoint on the sideline for their Stats and Scheme podcasts, which drop twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thank you so much. Let's get to the and super producer Matt Stopsky, also involved in that. Thanks, Matt, for making sure that we mention you. Let's get to thank you, Shawn. We'll get to the Anthony Richardson news real quick, and then we'll get back to who are the sellers and the complicating factors of actually coming to that realization, I guess, within a building, because that can be complicated. But Anthony Richardson going to the bench, I have said for weeks that I think that this is the right move. And I also don't think it is waving the white flag on Anthony Richardson, because I think that there are clearly, and Thomas, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. It's been a mess the last few weeks since he came back after being sidelined with the injury. And it's been a mess in ways that feel like a lack of experience at the just playing quarterback. It's a lack of reps and knowing how to do some of the like short and intermediate stuff is inconsistent. He's got the arm. They hit the big plays. His legs, obviously, we see what he can do there. My argument is that his tools are special. They are different than what we see traditionally and typically from a quarterback. And so you put him on the field and then just go, oh, it's not working. You're not going to give up on him in the same way that you would a different quarterback. And maybe we shouldn't do that with any quarterback, but I'm just being realistic here, saying, can we lift him off to the side? Can we develop those aspects of his game in terms of watching tape, in terms of diagnosing defenses, in terms of doing some of those other things that the quarterback does that don't rely on his physical tools, so that we can salvage his physical tools? Are there ways to do that off the field now that it looks like they might be going in that direction?
This is a great conversation and great points, Lindsay. I start with the general manager who picked him, Chris Ballard. Really good football man, tough, ornery, aggressive. I really respect the way that he puts his team together. They spent a lot of time looking at this young man. There are requisite traits that he has and athleticism that are rare. That said, in today's world, this is what we've talked about in scouting and team building for many, many years, Lindsay. It is very complicated to draft on potential, right? It's you know, a lot of coaches want to do it, but when you're the team builder, meaning when you're the general manager, you have to keep people in check where the coaches are saying, I can make this guy a star. He can be one of the best ever. That's where the projection is, but you have to be very careful, of course. You have to make sure that there's history there. And when there's not history there, it becomes really a projection, right? Meaning it's not like he had 4 years or 3 years. He had some backdrop there, and we talked about that, right? In the league, some of those people that didn't have a long career in college have not necessarily worked out, despite what their athleticism is. We don't have to talk about San Francisco's move a few years ago. All I would say this, back to Chris Ballard for a minute. Do you not think Chris Ballard, as competitive and driven as he is as a team builder, is looking at his quarterback who's tapping his helmet to come out
I know.
during the game? I mean, I am floored by that. I'm sorry. I understand people being injured. That's the dude that's at your helm. That's probably what precipitated this. I mean, and the maturity level that he needs.
I know the ways in which it's different, I guess, but I just want to say it out loud because we do see other quarterbacks. Luke Kuechly was on Kay Adams and said that he never saw Cam do anything like that. And Cam is the obvious comp, right? For somebody who was a big body who would do some of the similar things that Anthony Richardson had done on the play prior to tapping out. But we do see running backs when they have a big run, go to the sideline and come out, right? Like there's a reason for that, isn't there?
There's a reason for that. But when it's your dude, when it's your guy who's setting the tone, okay, it would never happen in the old days. And I don't want to be old school guy going, this is ridiculous. It is so counterintuitive for that guy that you're hoping is going to grow and the team wants to watch him. Last year he gets injured. I want to see him rise to the occasion and be everything he is. You have the team behind him and you see something like that. Older veterans, younger veterans. It's not their makeup. It's not what they've ever expected. I heard Chris Sims talking about, never seen that in his time of being around a lot of football, right? I have a great deal of respect for he and his dad over the years. The comments on that, it's just tough to see that. I get it. Fantastic athlete. But I'm sitting there, if I'm running a football team and I see that, major pause for me.
Yeah. Well, and they said that, Steichen said that I had a conversation with him. We talked. At the very least, we know it's a bad look and he understands that. And your point is well taken that it feels like a weird conversation to even have to have.
No.
But maybe that has to do with the inexperience that we're talking about here and the ways in which, and maybe it's not going to get there. Maybe it's not. That's 100% possible. But I'm literally looking at this from a Colts standpoint. How can we salvage this? How can we possibly salvage these tools? Let's try and find every way. Let's turn over every rock. And I think in the short term, this is the best way to do that. And it feels counterintuitive to be like taking him off the field is the way to salvage him. But I don't think putting him out there, the way that things were going, it just felt like you're setting him up for failure. And then, the mental stuff is tricky, right? Like that's a fine line before you just start to feel so. And I know that everybody feels like, oh, these guys get paid so much money and although he's on a rookie contract, so not really as much as you think yet, but that they should be able to handle everything. We hear over and over and over again from guys when they're young or after they're young. Like David Montgomery came on my fantasy podcast a few weeks back and talked about really, really personal stuff about he was in a really dark place his rookie year because he was hearing it from the people who thought he wasn't doing it for their fantasy teams and stuff like that. Like, I don't want him to, when he cannot do it, to be put in the position to constantly be put on the field to show us how he can't do it. I just think that at this point we need to protect him from himself.
No, you are so right. I mean, here's my thought, however. Again, categorically, so many traits and so many positives about growing with this guy. No question about it. There's maturity levels that we know that we need to do. We need to perform on a lot of levels. You need to work with them. All I'm saying, we're 2.5 years or almost 2 years in, a year and a half in.
Does the first year count?
Yeah. Well, but what I'm saying, this wasn't just him tapping his helmet, Lindsay.
Yeah,
this is something that is a culmination of a number of things. He just might not be ready. And if he's not ready, to your point, do you put him aside? Now, I will say this. When that happened in Carolina with another first round and a big time pick, of course, number one overall, right? Yes. I'm messing up.
Yeah.
It's a number one overall, of course. Yeah. When you're in the organization, Lindsay, I'm telling you the stresses that you have on you as a general manager, especially a guy like Chris Ballard is not the guy that shows it. He doesn't wear it on his sleeve, doesn't walk around nervous Nelly, but there's no question. It's the same in Carolina. When you start tucking people away who are your big time picks that you're riding on and they're quarterbacks, you get an uneasy feeling in your stomach every day of the rest of the season and into the off season. It is really uneasy for you to have issues with a quarterback that you put yourself on the line for. This guy needs to show them, I will grow and learn from this, Lindsay. I will do all I can to show you that I am the dude to carry on with this. But I'm sure there's a lot of questions about that right now.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to watch them. They're a team that is in the mix in the AFC. They fell out of the playoff picture maybe temporarily this past week. They're in 8th in the AFC at 4-4. And I think based on what we saw from Joe Flacco, they can remain competitive with him in the lineup. Again, counterintuitively, but anybody who plays fantasy knows that all of the wide receiver assets unlock when Joe Flacco's in. When Anthony Richardson is in, you got to hold them all back and put them on your bench or play them if you're desperate. Like that feels like it shouldn't be the thought process when it's your starting quarterback versus your backup quarterback. So let's move on here because the Indianapolis Colts, as I mentioned, are in the mix in the AFC. And This kind of gets us to like back to the trade deadline in the sense that it can be tricky sometimes to decide whether or not you are a seller. And the Colts are not sellers, I don't believe, because they're in the mix, but also the AFC has been pretty bad. There are some teams that are not particularly great that are in that playoff hunt. And so that changes this conversation, I think, from where it would normally be, because there are so many divisions that are there for the taking. So in terms of which teams are sellers, I'm going to run through some teams that I think might check this box. You tell me if there's a reason for them to not be sellers at this point. Okay. Panthers.
There is some breaking news here. Did you just see that? I mean, my gosh. Yes.
What's happening? What else is happening?
You're
Oh, we have a trade. Perfect timing for this. And it is related to the Ravens, and it is not the position group that we talked about. What? All right. Diontae Johnson traded to the Ravens, according to Ian Rappaport. So there's that. Let's bring in Sam Bruchhaus, because I know that Diontae Johnson was on his list of things that he wanted to talk about. And I will continue to look up like what the trade comp is and stuff like that, so we can add to this. But what do you think that Diontae Johnson, who is he as a wide receiver? What's his value? And how do you think he helps the Ravens?
Yeah. So the thing about Diontae Johnson is he's been kind of the analytics, more tracking metrics guru's favorite wide receiver for years. And people have been, crying out and saying he just hasn't been utilized well in the situation in Pittsburgh, where they were shuffling through quarterbacks, and now with the Panthers, where they were shuffling through quarterbacks as well in the short time that he played with him. When you look at the tracking metrics, his ability to get open and his ability to run routes is elite this year and has been elite in the past as well. And that shows up on film a little bit too, though he does, have some qualms about his size and other stuff like that. I know he's majority slot receiver as well. He's not one of those big X receivers that you can stick out there and really just throw the ball up to. But it makes sense that a franchise like the Ravens, who have, a quite built out analytical development cycle, they love to hire guys from within. Their whole team is really pulling the same rope in the game of tug of war in terms of team building. It makes sense that the Ravens go ahead and pull the trigger on a guy that they think they can utilize substantially better than he has been used in the past. Also an interesting rivalry piece, because he was with the Steelers last year and now he returns back to the AFC North.
Oh, look, can I just say, Lindsay, you see the comp there, right?
Yeah.
Great analysis, by the way, Sam. The comp?
Yeah. So
it's a no-brainer.
The Panthers got a fifth and obviously sent Johnson and a sixth to the Ravens.
I mean, Eric DaCosta, I'm going to get on the table for him, Lindsay. Like, that is a really good move.
And by the way, just to point out, this was the trade comp that Sumer's trade chart had turned up for us, right? Mike Wallace, and look at this, 5th round pick, and the Dolphins also sent a 7th round pick. So it's almost exactly spot on as to what our prediction would have been in terms of his value. I know that people were talking earlier this week about his value being kind of tough to nail down in ways that I think make a lot of sense, because Diontae Johnson has played with some poor quarterbacks over the course of his career. And even just in this one sample size of a season, we've seen such high variance with regards to what he is able to do because of his quarterback. Like, the environment for him when they went to Andy Dalton immediately, just like, it was like he was a totally different wide receiver, right? The opportunity went through the roof, and we saw kind of maybe a little bit more, I don't want to say a ceiling, because it's still the Panthers offense and it's Andy Dalton, the backup quarterback running the show, but you got a chance to see what he could do, as opposed to for huge stretches of his career where he's playing with poor quarterbacks. And it's like, I don't know, man, it's inconsistent, but is it inconsistent because of him, or is it inconsistent because of the offense? And so this will be fascinating to see him with the Ravens. And it also is not lost on me that, Diontae Johnson was a name that we threw around for weeks with regards to the Chiefs too. And so the Chiefs, who are making move after move after move, I'm not saying that they would have gone to get Diontae Johnson in addition to getting D-Hop. Like, we're just bringing everybody into Kansas City, but it's possible. It's not off the table that they might not have made this move. And so this takes them off the plate for them also.
Well, Lindsay, can I just interject here? And I want Sam's comments on this. When you look at this and you look at, Dan Morgan, let's talk Carolina for a minute, right? Dan Morgan, talk about Brant Tillis and our buddy, right? Who's
Eric.
really active there, Eric Eager over there on the data side. They're looking at the comps from a different, like, emotional side that I might even have looked at it. And they're saying, this is a move that we need, a fifth, and the comp that was going back and forth. I think this is, I mean, I just want you to know, I really believe this. Carolina is a smart organization. I know people want to throw their darts, and there's polarizing opinions at certain levels about certain things and what's going on there. They're going to be smart moving into the next waves of this. So I love it. So Sam, I'd love your comments on that. How complicated is it to move someone that is legitimate in your mind for a fifth? And
yes. So I'm thinking about the strategy here all the way in. I think, you know, you look at those fifth round, you know, kind of day 3 picks, and they kind of start to flatten out on that kind of barrier in terms of the pick curve. So you're talking about a fifth, you're talking about a sixth. I really want to harken back to what they traded him for. They really kind of did a starter for starter swap at the beginning of the year, him for Diontae Jackson, I believe, who goes to the Steelers, been playing pretty well. And they bring him in. And the strategy, I'm assuming, was, hey, let's get a guy in here who we know can get open, put him beside Adam Thielen and some of our rookie wide receivers, and let's see who we have in this quarterback. When the quarterback kind of goes down, you go into value accumulation mode, and you start seeking out trade partners who may, you know, value him differently than other teams. And I think the Ravens probably value him a little bit differently. And I'm sure the Panthers knew that. So then they're evaluating the position. We know the position is a piece of high value. And for that, you know, you're looking at the type of player, you're looking kind of more in that 4th, 5th round. You try to negotiate as well as you can. He's on the last year of his contract, Thomas. And you know more than anyone, like, you don't want to lose that guy for anything when you haven't gotten anything out of him. And he's done, I guess, his job in proving that, you know, your number 1 pick maybe doesn't have the juice. Let's get him out and let's get some value back. And I think they've now created a guy who they obviously wanted to move off of anyway in terms of Diontae Jackson, and basically gotten a fifth and a pick swap back for him. So I think this is a pretty good series of moves from the Panthers and a pretty good process.
Also now, what do the Panthers have left? An opportunity to develop Xavier Leggett. They've got Jalen Coker, who can step into a bigger role. And now this gives them an opportunity for the second half of the season to kind of get reps, important reps, to some of their younger guys, and then also get a read on what they might be able to be. Xavier Leggett, a guy, by the way, the fantasy read here is go pick him up, but that's separate.
Well, Lindsay, let me ask you this now. Okay, let's factor in a quarterback situation. Let's say our guy's not healing his hand, thumb, whatever it is. So our young guy is back in the mix. How do you feel about that if you're the quarterback going, oh, man, we're moving some product here, good people for me to toss the ball and continue to grow with? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a concern, but I also think the second that they took Bryce Young off the field to start with, because I think he is different than Anthony Richardson. So just to clarify, anybody who's like, wait, hypocrisy, you said something totally different. I don't think taking Bryce Young off the field was even though they say, like, let's go develop him over here, I don't think that his tools are the same as an Anthony Richardson. I don't think you're like, let's salvage this. I think that what we've seen from him is he might need time to develop 100%. Everybody could benefit from that for sure. But I don't know that there's stuff screaming there that's like, this will work if we give it time, if you develop me in this way. I don't know that I'm not as sold on whether or not Bryce Young will hit inevitably down the road. So I'm not making that bet as much. And so I kind of think in this case, yes, this stunts his development, but you already sort of decided that you were probably okay trying to get a different quarterback in the future. I anticipate that they're probably looking at quarterbacks in next year's draft. So this hurts them or hurts him, but I don't know that that's their number 1 priority anymore.
It's up to Dave Canales, of course, and Dan Morgan and company there to mollify any sort of bubbling situation there where a quarterback and his agent is thinking, okay, they're completely cashing out on me now. They're moving on from players. I need to get better. And they're moving on from players. This comes back to, we haven't even discussed this. Is there and are there players out there, teams still interested in a quarterback who is young and has been benched at Carolina? does he go somewhere else? And I don't want to get off on a tangent here. It keeps coming to my mind. There are offensive gurus out there who are saying, man, if I could only get my hands on Bryce Young, maybe that would happen. I don't know.
Do you think anyone's just saying that?
I do.
mean, I know it's a hypothetical. You do.
Oh,
Who?
no question. No question.
Who do you think is saying that?
I'm saying, I won't put names out there, but I'm saying the really smart offensive people out there who have strong, stout quarterback growth sort of organizations and who are creative and incredibly intelligent. There's no way they are not thinking about this. Yes, he is smaller. I get it. But he has a reputation and a history of doing good things. Get him in my system, so to speak. These guys are thinking, I will make him thrive. I guarantee there are people out there like that.
Mm-hmm.
What you've been shaking or nodding your head specifically, Sam. Do you agree? And do you want to put any names there? Any places that you think would make sense to try and bring Bryce Young in?
Yeah, I mean, I think you go through the list of teams who, number one, have not invested in the quarterback position yet. I think the Raiders come up in that. They have Aiden O'Connell, who's on a rookie contract. They have Gardner Minshew, who's on a backup level contract for all intents and purposes. You know, the way the rookie contracts are structured, a lot of that money's tied up in the signing bonus anyway. To baseball's going on right now, a lot of home runs. Like, you're looking and just swinging for the fences on that. And I think if you can buy pretty low for a guy who was evaluated by the whole league and the consensus of the draft environment as a top pick, you're just thinking, I haven't invested a lot. Maybe I give up a fourth, a fifth. I think the Cowboys kind of did this with Trey Lance to a certain degree as well. I think that's a good comp for that trade. And see if you can't turn your season around. I think the Raiders are in an interesting spot where they have the Broncos, who have performed very well, have a very good defense, but perhaps they'll regress here shortly. You have the Chargers, who are struggling with all types of injuries, and we've seen Justin Herbert go down. Like, if you think that you have a shot to compete in a division and you don't have a quarterback and you're able to get a guy on a rookie contract that you have basically 2-3 years of control over, it could be very interesting just to have him in the building, to motivate other guys or to throw him out there, see what he looks like in practice for a very relatively low cost.
Well, low cost. So we might be in disagreement here. And Lindsay, you can chime in and navigate this banter a little bit, because I think it's not going to be a fourth. You're going to have to come up with a deuce. Maybe it's not a first round. You're going to have a deuce. You're going to have a 4 and a 5-ish. You're going to have to bring a package together for this.
Well,
I mean, Stopsky, didn't he just pull up
Sam Darnold to Carolina as just an example of a quarterback who went very high in the draft. And then it didn't work out in his first stop, goes to a second stop. They gave up a second, a fourth, and a sixth.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I just don't think it's going to be that easy, Sam, where people are like, or Carolina's like, yeah, go ahead. Give us a fourth. We'll cash out. He's not a wasted case right now. And honestly, Lindsay, with all of these quarterbacks that are doing what they're doing right now, some of the people that you love and you keep feeding me saying, they're legit.
Darnold.
Yeah.
Darnold.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so I want to keep coming back to people who love this guy. Remember, it wasn't like Carolina was the only team that loved him. This is where I keep coming back to this, Lindsay, right?
Yeah.
Of course, there are a lot of people like, I don't know if I'd do it first overall. Of course, there were that group. But there are others, believe me, within that building and outside that building, we're 100% behind this kid. So it's interesting.
Right. Yeah. And Thomas, that's a really good point, because, on the analytical side, sometimes we get a little bit stuck on, the numbers and the production. And an interesting point here, especially as the quarterbacks, Andy Richardson has gotten benched, is like Josh Allen, for example, was the absolute dregs of the league in all the metrics, like across the board in the metrics, turning the ball over, not being able to complete passes, not being efficient in terms of expected points added, so forth and so on. And now he's one of my favorite players in the league. And so you make a really good point of like, you got to kind of stick to your subjective evaluation. And that's why I love to get that perspective from you and our scouts here at SumerSports, because really sometimes you really have to ground yourself, especially at the quarterback position where there's so many moving variables. And he's had 2 coaches and 2 offense coordinators and so forth and so on. That was a really good insight.
It's an interesting conversation in parallel to the draft conversation, right? And what this year's class looks like, because I'm it's not necessarily an elite quarterback class. It's not as good as the last couple of years at quarterback, I'm hearing from draft analysts. But what one person who is a big name draft analyst that I just don't want to say because it's kind of his stuff to say, I don't want to attach a name to it, said that he thinks that what can happen in the first round is that some of these owners might start chiming in, right? Like, so it's not a great quarterback class, but once you have owners chiming in and saying we need a quarterback, that will push people up the board maybe a little bit more than they deserve to be just based on their evaluation. And so, but all of that in mind kind of makes it interesting with regards to Bryce Young, right? Like if it's not a particularly good quarterback class and there aren't people that are just like this past year was a great quarterback class, right? And I've heard people say that the best quarterback in this year's class probably would have gone like 5th in this year's class. Like, you're not slotting up there with the top guys. So does that change the way that you even approach somebody like Bryce Young in terms of being willing to give him a second chance? Because there just isn't anybody out there in the draft who's like knocking your socks off.
It's a great point on the lack of strength. It's not bad, to your point. And to your point, I think, Lindsay, the pushing of the owners, right? The owners telling their guys, their people, hey man, we need this. Some of the biggest mistakes in anyone would get in here. You could bring in any GM buddy of yours, Lindsay, over the years. They'd raise their hand categorically and say, the biggest mistakes I made were when I was pushed either directly, indirectly by wherever of the need that I need, the need for the organization. That's where the mistakes made. Oh man, I need a pass rusher. I need a cat that's going to zip the ball as a quarterback. We need him so bad that we're now going from 15th, 20th up into the top 5 because we need him and there are no others there. And this could be that situation this year. And yet people keeping perspective on it might think there is a guy, as we're talking about in Bryce Young, that you can push that aside for a minute here and work on what we do know that he is. Anyway, it's a really good point on your part.
Let's get back to the sellers here. And now, like on cue, I ask if the Panthers are sellers and they trade Diontae Johnson away. So we get our answer. And it was sort of a rhetorical question because obviously they're sellers, right? Like it's not good. It's not getting there this year. What about the Giants? Do we think that the Giants are sellers? We don't have to have a long discussion. Just can say like yay or nay.
Yeah,
Stop.
it's
desperately
an
wants
interesting
to chime in here.
Yeah, it's an interesting note. I mean, we saw the performance on Monday evening. It's tough to say if they're sellers. Like who do they have that is worth selling? What is the value of those guys? That's I think what all of the analytics guys. I think Darius Slayton could be an interesting piece, but I think his compensation is probably at that Diontae Johnson level or less, perhaps. Like on that defensive side, like we've actually seen them not be an atrocious defense. Perhaps they want to move Dexter Lawrence, but he's their MVP right now. Like, can you get away with doing that?
Azeez Ojulari.
Yeah, that's another good, edge rusher type player that if some people strike out as edge rushers start flying here in the next couple of days, it'll be interesting if he becomes the top name, or, I mean, Max is off the table now, according to reports. Does he become a guy who can be a difference maker? I think Thomas's point, and I'd love his thoughts on this, is like, does he get you over the edge? He's behind guys like Burns and like they were playing Thibodeau in front of him as well. Like, does he really push you to the next level in that you're able to give away that much compensation for him?
Gosh, I just put myself in Joe Shane's seat as well as Brian Daboll, Sam, and I'm like, okay, I'm hearing everything you're saying there, and they should be considering that. The owner just gave them the thumbs up, right? Am I correct, Lindsay? Like he's given them like a vote of confidence.
Yeah, that's usually a death knell, but yeah, we can go with that.
I mean, I think.
By the way, you're the perfect. Like, how if you got a vote of confidence the way that it was said to them, would you feel more confident?
Well, if it were to be for the media and the team, but my owner didn't necessarily say it to me truly in my office and said, hey, this is a true vote of confidence, not feigning this for the fan base.
Yeah.
Then I go in there and I start thinking with my head coach, Brian Daboll, who I have a great deal of respect for. I know there are some Giants fans out there, losing their mind. And, Stopsky, I know you're a Giants fan and you do some great work there. I won't bring you into this, but my point is Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, where do they go? They step back and they start thinking, we need as much talent going into the end of this year, continuing to develop, and going into next year if we're going to have a legit chance at pulling this off.
Mm-hmm.
So
but you're talking about pulling it off in the future, right? Because you're
Yes.
2-6. You're at the bottom of the NFC East. The Commanders have taken a commanding lead. Look at me with all of the puns. Good God, stop it. So I mean, to me, they seem, obviously they're a team that don't have a quarterback. Like moving forward, like I don't know where we are with the Giants. So if I could get something to help me rebuild, I would probably feel pretty confident about doing that.
But are you admitting, Lindsay, though, that you didn't do your job building your team? These are all the things that enter my mind, meaning
you're right.
It shouldn't be about the media or the fan base. It should be about your organization. Unfortunately, they revealed a lot in Hard Knocks, right? There's so much going on out there. Like what was done with this team to build it and to build it correctly and so forth. So all I'm saying is I know this isn't an easy discussion, especially if you're bringing in someone you're selling someone that he could still be very effective for us in the future. What we do normally in that spot is you start looking at what's out there in the draft. You want to start talking about receivers. If you're talking about moving a receiver or whatever position it may be, I think it's important to see what that class is. It's a solid draft class in the receiver world. Is it exactly what you think? Are you going to get you have an amazing new receiver there, right?
Right.
So maybe it is you're more legit. All I am saying is, man, it's an uneasy feeling when I dole someone out and then everyone's saying, you guys are quitters. You guys are moving on, because you're going to get that. And if you're Brian Daboll is a driven guy. The last thing he wants to be known walking down the streets of New York City is that you're quitting on us. You're quitting on us. You're selling property here legitimate deals on people that are so important for us to build with. And these guys that you're thinking about moving are going to take away from our not only our immediate successes and chances of winning, but also our ability to, grow into the future.
Yeah. And this is a very interesting conversation, Thomas, because as you are hired as a general manager, and I've heard you say this many times, to see the future, to kind of be over all of the domains of the football team. And Brett Veach kind of said this week that, we got to be all in every year. That's why we're making some of these moves. And let's say the owner came in, y'all had a kumbaya, y'all came together and said, we're going to take a, process-based approach to really solving this team. We have Malik Neighbors. We think he's a great wide receiver. Tyrone Tracy played very good at the running back position.
Yeah.
Their left tackle is hurt, but we feel good about him. We have Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Okereke, some of these guys on our front that we really like. At that point, how are you valuing what you see this season versus what you think you can do in future years and next year's in the draft? What do draft picks become more valuable at this point than they were, in September? What's kind of the balance of how you start valuing that in your head, Thomas?
Do you want to chime in first from your perspective, Lindsay? I'm sorry.
I think he definitely wants to hear from you, but I think it's a good point. And you talk about losing the left tackle there. You don't have Andrew Thomas. And Stopsky and I had talked about earlier in the season about maybe even doing an episode that would be fun about like who's each team's Jenga piece. Like when you take that out, the whole thing falls apart in ways that are, pretty extreme. And it seems pretty clear that was a pretty big piece for them. And you do get him back moving forward. And I think all the points that you made there about Tyrone Tracy and Malik Neighbors, that's good. But this actually feels like, Thomas, a way that they could get out of this without it looking like, I think you do have something that you have to address at the quarterback position. This feels like it, and they got him all fired up last night and stuff like that. And they said that's what they want out of him. But like, is that enough? Have we seen enough? Is he your dude? Or do you go through your roster one at a time and go, what do we have? What do we not have? How damaging is it to not have this person? And what pieces do we need to acquire now so that we could go get the pieces in the draft to fill these specific holes? It seems like this would be a good process conversation, and the Giants are a perfect team to be, discussing in this as an example.
Yeah, to go out and figure out the pieces moving forward. I mean, it is so complicated, selling pieces, buying pieces. I mean, it totally depends on, in my mind, how you see, the future going. Do we have, Istovsky, can you bring up the stats on where the Giants, are they like 2% playoff? I don't know what it is. Probably not that far down. There's still a lot of time left here, right? I guess I just keep coming back to the pieces that you need to sell or keep, and how important that is when you're building your team for the future versus building for now. And anyway, I don't want to repeat myself on that, but if those two men who are their team builders don't know exactly how they're going to put those pieces together, it's complicated. I would love just to see
let me read to you real quickly. So they're 2-6. They're 15th out of 16 teams in the NFC, and this is their upcoming schedule. Commanders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Panthers. Maybe that one's winnable. Tampa Bay. Dallas. Maybe that one's winnable. Saints. Then you've got the Ravens, and then you've got the Falcons, then you've got the Colts, and then you've got the Eagles. I just don't know if I see a path forward in their schedule objectively that says, we should really stick with this. But I think the points that you bring up are really good. When you're the person that built a team, and you also have an investment with the pieces, and you know what you saw, and you might be more married to your priors than those of us on the outside, because you know what you had in mind for that person. You think they just haven't tapped into their potential. Like maybe there are guys on that team that are their version of my Anthony Richardson, where I'm like, I got to protect him. This could still hit, and that's inevitably going to happen across the league. What about some other teams though here? Because I think that these conversations apply to all of these teams that I'm mentioning. The Titans, who have already sent D-Hop packing. The Titans are pretty far down there in the standings. I just pulled up the schedule, so it's not in front of me anymore, but I can re-pull that up. So the Titans are in 16th. They are 1-6. So this does feel like a team that, could go ahead and make some more moves. You also have the Patriots and Raiders, who I think fit into this category. You could argue that the Browns, maybe this is the moment when they shouldn't, because as we mentioned earlier, they're probably much more suited to be competitive now without Watson on the field. But my guess is that doesn't matter, and that they might start tearing down some of these pieces just for the future because they're a mess. The Saints we talked about, Dennis Allen said that they're not in sell mode, though perhaps they should be. The Jets are a team that, they were buyers 2 weeks ago. I think that they could enter the selling conversation. The Cowboys won't. That's a team that probably should be, but just won't, because Jerry would never play that game. And then I went, no.
Okay.
This is just Stopsky throws up Garrett Wilson. Just troll me here, because there's no way.
Right? He just because of a ball hitting his chest, like we've started talking about this. Honestly, sorry, Stopsky. I know you're not a Jets fan. Maybe you are. Maybe I don't want to put the Jets people out here. But I
think he can be both. I don't feel like that's against the rules.
No, he's not. I thought all Long Islanders were, but maybe I'm wrong. I guess they're not. I don't know that. This is a great point, though, Lindsay. Very quickly,
yeah.
I look at all of this when I try to differentiate, and Sam, is I look at the people that are in charge of the organization and what their natural inclination is. I'm tripping on my words again. That is important, right? Andrew Berry in Cleveland and his group there, they're data oriented, right? I feel like the data teams are much more data, depth teams are much more apt to do this. The older school guys, not as much, right? Whether even they could even be younger guys in the early 40s as general managers. It's just not what they've been brought up doing. Where some of the teams, again, I just see that. So I will lead into that, Sam. I don't know, when I start looking at some of these teams, who's going to do it. Back to the Jets. You brought up the Jets, right, Lindsay? Well, where are we with that? Are you not?
I mean, they're not gonna sell off the pieces because they have Aaron Rodgers. They have him for a short period of time. Like, are they going to admit right now and then put Aaron Rodgers back out on the field? Like, I just don't even think they want to deal with it.
But now we've switched subtly where I see Mike Williams up there, very different than Garrett,
well, that's
right?
a different story. That's not even selling. That's just, we don't have use for your services anymore. And can we get something back? Because we would love to get things back at this point. Like, we need assets, but I just don't think that they could take anybody that holds value to them and dangle them to anybody else.
I mean, they're in a situation right now. Again, I mean, I've said this before. I mean, Joe Douglas is a very good team builder, and they have some very good football players on that team. And they have an owner who's been around it a long, long time, right? Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. They have a head coach that's trying to figure out his own way, right? Jeff Albrecht was with us with the Falcons. Good, tough, hard-nosed football man for sure. How is that going to play out? With every loss, it becomes more and more complicated for that team. So they have a lot on their plate, right, Sam? They're trying to figure out a lot of different things. How do they make, in your mind, a decision to move on someone at this point? Because I thought they were still 40% in. Is that not the correct number? They're still in it, correct? That's a.
Are you saying the Jets?
Yeah.
Well, where are we getting 40%?
No, I don't know.
Just out of curiosity, not because I think that's totally wrong.
We did not get it from Stopsky. I got it from someone. It might have been some drunk person down wherever it was. all I'm saying is, when I look at that division, it's seemingly so up in the air. That's my mind, and that's probably why our buddy Peter Schrager was raving about him early on, right? That and saying now that he's backing out of it. Anyway, Sam, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I was kind of in that camp of liking the Jets for the reasons that you outlaid. Their defense has been for real for years now. They have true guys at every position on their defense. And now on their offense, you rebuild an offensive line. You have a couple of injuries. Morgan Moses misses a couple games. They try their best to rebuild the wide receiver group. As an analyst who's like always trying to get ahead, even I am like, I don't know what you do here other than just try to win. There's not a ton of moves they can make. Mike Williams isn't going to garner a bunch. Why would you move? If you do want to move forward as an organization, and you've seen Garrett Wilson be successful with quarterbacks who are not good, why would you move off of him? He's valuable to your team moving forward. You traded for Diontae. No returns really yet. Very, he was there midweek sleeping on Aaron Rodgers' floor with a pillow and a blanket, I guess, or something like that. Like, who knows where he's at? You got to go on. You got to figure it out. I don't think that they even have the assets to be buyers still, but I can't imagine from a personal perspective how they could be sellers moving forward.
But you can't be buyers. You could maybe just say, we're going to stand with this and try our best, but you can't possibly put more resources into this. Like, it's a full sunken cost situation here. Exactly. You are 2-6. And by the way, Buffalo's 6-2. Like, you're not going to flip that division. Like, they've shown no signs. I told you earlier, they're plus 84 in terms of margin of victory. Buffalo is not going to just completely, like, the wheels aren't going to come off unless, I'm not even going to say the words, but you know what I'm going to say. Like, if they lose one piece, right? But that's it. And that's unlikely to happen. And then you're just fighting to get back in this playoff hunt with, like, and admittedly, the teams that are in the playoff mix, like, you've got Denver in the 5 spot in the AFC. You've got the Chargers in the 7 spot. Like, those could absolutely flip. But I think it's unlikely to flip to the Jets, a team that I think.
Wait a minute. Can I just interject? Because I want you to blast me on this.
Okay.
And if there's one man at the quarterback position, whether you like him or not at this point in his career, that can bring you back. All of a sudden, we've seen Aaron Rodgers like, oh my God.
Well, we haven't seen it in years.
I know. Well, how many years? It hasn't. Last year wasn't counting.
Yeah, when he was in a.
But the last year in Green Bay, no, either. No.
Well, he had those other things.
They had a late run before my guys in Detroit.
You guys
sat him down, but
all right, maybe he'll get him back in.
Did have a little bit of a late run.
Lindsay, you were fighting for a second-year guy who's been injured. You were backing him, right? Richardson. Yeah. I'm backing Aaron Rodgers.
Okay. That's your guy. I'll take mine. You take yours. We're good.
Guys, I don't know if y'all
you sure are calling your shot there, Thomas.
I don't know if y'all have seen Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I think me and Thomas are on the Jets bandwagon, and hopefully we don't end up like Larry David and his buddies at the end of the season.
I think it's literally a bandwagon at this point. Like you are on like a 1920s like moving vehicle. But anyway,
okay.
so where I'm going with this here in terms of the playoff picture and a team that I think has been, well, they've been mentioned as sellers with specific pieces in mind that I think I see the other way actually, and that's the Bengals. So everyone's talking about the Bengals with regards to Trey Hendrickson. Everybody's talking about T. Higgins and the fact that he has to move and all these different pieces. And I'm looking at the Bengals before we even get to those specific conversations about Trey and about T. I'm looking at the Bengals sitting there at 3-5, admittedly, yuck. But also 9th, right? Like they're just outside the playoff picture. And Joe Burrow has played great this year. All of the advanced stats point to like you pull up any kind of passing or offensive passing, team offense in general, and the run game, not so much. But pretty much everything in the passing game is like pushing them to the top of they can make a run on offense. They could beat any team. They could put up points. The defense has some holes. So that's why I mentioned seeing them more as like a team that is in the mix. And if they could just fix something on the defensive side of the ball, then maybe they go make a move the other way to bring somebody in as opposed to shipping people out because the AFC playoff picture is still so up for grabs. Does anyone else see it that way? Or are you like 100% T's got to go, Trey's got to go, we're done?
Go ahead, Sam.
You look at the numbers, Lindsay, and everything indicates that exactly what you said has happened. Like they're catching the bad side of variance. You look at their net points, they're in the range of the 4-4 and 5-3 teams in terms of net points, sitting, just negative. They're in the range of the Falcons and the Seahawks. Now, this team, the Bengals typically have a more conservative approach to player acquisition. They like to build through the draft. They have not really been super active in October and November in the past. And as you said, their offense is very, very good. Joe Burrow is frankly playing at like an MVP type level. We didn't see it all come together last week, but we've seen it many times. They're 4th in pass EPA. The problem.
Why didn't we see it last week? Who was missing from the game? If we sold him, I'm just saying, who was not there? Was it the guy on the screen right now? Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
No, very true. And I think they're a very complex team because I think they have a mixture of extremely good on offense, and in terms of net points, it could have swung left or right, over 500, and maybe a play here and an inch there, and all of a sudden we're talking about them as a playoff contender. But they're also really not good on defense, and particularly they're really not good on the run defense. I mean, they're 31st in EPA, dead last in success rate. Here's some teams that were in that spot last year: Arizona 4-13, Carolina 2-15. You look at Dallas and Kansas City and San Francisco, they ended up being good. However, they're also, when you add in the pass game, still one of the bottom teams in the league. And the best that a team ended up last year was 8-9 Denver. And if you're the Bengals, you have a lot of talent on that team. You have Trey Hendrickson, you have Sam Hubbard, you have Mike Hilton, and all these guys on that defense. Lou Anarumo, a respected defensive coordinator. You have to evaluate what's going on there. And frankly, you look at some of their advanced statistics, the place that they're really struggling is the back end in terms of run defense. Trey Hendrickson isn't doing great in the run defense, but he's a 7+ sack guy right now. The pieces are just not coming together. It's very complicated. It will be very interesting. I think they could swing both ways, really.
So interesting. Thomas, do you factor any of that stuff into mind? You've talked about how hard it is to be a seller anyway, because it's an admission that you're making, right? Well, now you've got a couple of pieces here that people specifically want, and you might need to unload because you're not going to have them moving forward. So T. Higgins is a perfect example of, I think he's just the most complicated piece right now, because you do you move yourself into the seller category if you move T. Higgins. That's a huge blow to your offense. But you don't have him past this year. Are you going to put a second franchise tag on him? That might be cost prohibitive. And so
Well, it's a really good question. I'm sitting there thinking about what enters my mind. And there's another topic that just came up and another headline. What if you lose another receiver? This guy, all of a sudden you move him and you lose your receiver. What are you doing at that point? Go ahead. You want to talk about the next headline?
Breaking news. Dun, 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 dun. Stephon Diggs is out for the season. Which
what
feel
happens
like
there? What if you move T and then
they need someone?
I just don't
Or
know.
maybe not. Maybe the Texans just go, no. Like, we don't go make big moves for this year.
No.
Maybe it's not the year, you know? I don't know how do the Texans deal with that? Because you're going to get Nico Collins back from IR.
Yeah.
Right? He's not out indefinitely. It's an IR situation. So he's got to be coming back soon, right? He's been out for weeks.
Yeah.
Then you do have Tank Dell. Diontae is already gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really liked them for Diontae too. I thought that was a fantastic fit.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
What about T? Did they become a landing spot for T, or is that just too much? Because they actually do have Steph next year, and they have Nico, and they have Tank. So why would you give something up? That feels like a short-sighted move, right?
Well, I don't know. I would daydream about it with a quarterback like they do have out there with Stroud. It would be really cool to see something like that. I just coming back to T, like it's not an easy situation, Lindsay, right? Because to your point, how are they going to sign both of those receivers? That is a really, really dicey situation. I don't admire where they are with this, but I don't know.
His comp keeps coming up as like a very high pick that I can't wrap my brain around, because so as you see on the screen, Amari Cooper, and this was the Raiders to the Cowboys Amari Cooper trade that the model sees as the closest comp for T. And as you see on your screen there, that was a first round pick. So if we are going to, that's a good point. Sorry, separately with regards to the Diggs conversation, Diggs is a free agent after this year. So that anyway might actually be a good reason to go make a move like this with regards to the Texans. But in terms of comp, it has to be a team. I mean, obviously, the problem with paying a 1 for the right to then have him for a few months and then pay him a fresh contract where he's going to want wide receiver 1 money.
No question.
I don't know why somebody wouldn't just wait until the offseason, because like I said, I don't think that the Bengals are going to put another franchise tag on him. Right. And so wouldn't you just enter that mix in the offseason? Like giving up a 1 to get him just for a few months and to get to the front of the line in that conversation feels real expensive to me.
It's really
sorry, I keep asking and then talking over your answers. Also, where is he as a 1? Because this is your favorite question, Thomas, with regards to quarterbacks. Like, where do you rank him? So if we're willing to say he's a wide receiver 1, and statistically some of the numbers pop and show, like, you know, even though he's a 2 with the Bengals, like he's up there in terms of EPA and all that kind of stuff. But is he like a wide receiver 1 that is your main guy, or is he more of like a low end wide receiver 1? Do you have one of the better wide receiver 1s in the league, or do you have one of the lower wide receiver 1s in the league where you need a really strong 2 to put opposite him?
It's a great point. I mean, my thought on him is I love him in the red zone. I love size. There's a lot that I really like about T. He's played out over his draft pick. He was a second, right? I can't remember exact pick he was. That said, I feel like he's that 1A, right? I feel like he can be a 1, but you're always looking to have someone else there that can be right next to him, just a hair above at a certain level on certain levels within his game. So I think he's a very good 1, but I don't know if coming in that you're saying categorically he's your 1, number 1, not 1A. I'm still undecided about that.
How do you feel, Sam, about the comp and what that likely means for somebody trading for him? And who is the team for whom that would be worth it?
Yeah. It's such a tough question because, as you highlighted earlier, Lindsay, he is so important to this team, but they have Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you're always, as Thomas alluded to, you're always going to pay Jamar Chase, who has had just a fantastic season this year. But before you pay T, so it's this weird intersection of what team thinks that he is more valuable as an X receiver than he is as, playing Z or spelling it X for when Jamar goes into the slot or something like that. I think that it would have to be some similar calculus as the Eagles had with AJ Brown, and they hit really well on that. Like they thought he was a really good wide receiver. They make the move for him. He wasn't, super all-pro guy at that time with the Titans, and he became that guy in an Eagles uniform. That has to be the projection you have. I don't know. I think that he's probably like a solid starter as a one, but I don't think he's going to be, a game breaker that you're going to want to trade like a first or a second for, but that's his value in the league right now. It's like such a weird mismatch. And that's what makes this Bengals situation so interesting, because they actually have guys that people do want to trade for and people that can be winning players. And they have like the cap considerations, the franchise tags in the mix. They typically are a pretty like cash conservative team as well. It's such a complex situation, and it brings to light the things that SumerSports really works on, which is like, how do you value these guys and how can they do outside of their current context? And he does well on all of our numbers, but you really got to believe and you really got to be tight with your scouting department on that as well, in my opinion.
So based on all the things that you just said and Thomas said, going back to the Houston Texans, if they don't have Diggs past this season and you do have Nico's a 1, T. Higgins is your 1A. Like, is this maybe a team, and also a team that, I mean, no one wants to give away a high draft pick, but a team that has fewer holes maybe than some of the other teams that we're talking about here, like the Bucs. Everybody's trying to put a wide receiver on their team, but I just think that they need so much help on the defensive side of the ball that if you're going to make a move for a wide receiver, you better make a couple moves on the defensive side also, or else you're sort of wasting the move. Although in this case, you're also potentially bringing somebody in, paying them to fill Godwin's spot moving forward, right? Like now this is more of a long-term get to the front of the free agency line type of move. And so in that sense, that might make move in like T. Higgins's case. But the Texans do become a slightly interesting landing spot because it feels like a place that T would probably thrive.
I keep thinking about this, and I'm thinking exactly what you're talking about, and I'm thinking, wow, this keeps coming back to 4 or 5 years ago. There were 7 trades during this time. This is unbelievable discussion. And what are we at, Stopsky? I think we're at 14 now. Like 14 is in scope. And what is basketball? What are those trades? Like we're a very inactive league, correct?
Yeah.
In the scope of it all, because there's so much of these discussions that you're having right now, Lindsay, that are tough discussions to have and to pull the trigger on them. We can all,
we made a baseball analogy earlier, right? With the Bryce Young situation, making a home run. And that's one of the things I thought about watching the World Series last night was that they were talking about, they're like, oh, if they hadn't brought this guy in at the deadline, and man, they sure made a smart move there bringing that guy in at the deadline. And I was like, this is so funny that we're going to go talk about the NFL, and are we moving in more of a direction where those are the kinds of moves that we see more frequently, like we do in other sports? Baseball, you do see a lot of moves at the trade deadline, and it kind of feels like we're maybe moving in a direction where that might be true for football also, though some of these are harder to make than others. Let's talk about Trey Hendrickson for a minute, because we're already on the Bengals and T, and the other piece there is Trey Hendrickson. And how do you value him? Because we've talked about a bunch of teams that need pass rushers. So maybe that even drives the value up to a degree. If the Bengals are willing to have this conversation and send him off, then it would seem like there are probably a few teams that would pick up the phone to at least figure out if, they might be able to come to terms. What do you think those terms might be, Sam?
Yeah. You look at him as a pass rusher, and he has been absolutely elite for like 4 years, going back to even his Saints days. And it's across the board in terms of pass rushing. And then you compare it to his violence with his hands, his ability to hand fight on the outside and really pressure the pocket from the edge. And he's just a guy, particularly this year, even though he is getting up there in age as we have up there right now, comparing him to Jason Pierre-Paul at age 29. Like he's getting to an age where you start to question the future. but the production is there. And frankly, he's like a top tier production guy when it comes to finishing quarterback hits into sacks and finishing pressures into sacks. You know, Thomas, you mentioned it earlier, and it perked up my ears. You mentioned the Atlanta Falcons. Man, would I love him in a Falcons uniform. Terry Fontenot, former Saints guy, Lake Charles, Louisiana, you know, hometown. That's where I'm from as well. They got Caden Ellis on that team. They have kind of that attacking style. Raheem Morris was with y'all with the Falcons. He saw Trey Hendrickson kind of come from an unheralded draft pick to a superstar kind of in his last year there, 2020. What do you think about him and the Falcons?
No, I think it's another great thought about building, you know, a team that is, you know, on the verge of continuing to project forward. I love what their mentality is on defense. They're not getting the pass rush. They know that. But I keep coming back, and I love your thought on this, Sam. Duke Tobin, the de facto GM there at Cincinnati, Mr. Brown, who's, you know, the family has been there. It's got a conservative approach. This guy's such a foundational person for them. Gosh, I just don't see that happening. You know, the move happening in the end. I was the one that was projecting it early, Lindsay, and sorry, Sam, I don't mean to put water on it. I get excited when I think about him going somewhere else, and it's tough for me to get my head around it.
Why is it, Sam, that we're having these conversations about Trey moving specifically? What is it with his contract status? Is it age related? Like, why is it that his name keeps coming up as a piece that the Bengals might be willing to move?
They have such a complex cap situation, particularly like we mentioned, Lindsay, like they struggled a little bit with T. And if their goal is to set up their quarterback, Joe Burrow, who's having a great year for the future, you have to make, you know, cuts elsewhere, especially when you're the Bengals and you kind of have that unique situation that they do. And given that he's one of the higher paid players on their team, he has like another year on his deal, kind of a longer term outlook than the guys that they have on the franchise tag. If you want to keep T, and moreover, Jamar Chase has said publicly, like, I don't care if it's $1 over what Justin Jefferson is getting paid, but I'm getting paid over what my buddy is getting paid. You know, you're going to have to shell out for him. He's going to want guarantees that they typically have not done because they did it for Joe Burrow as well. He's been with Joe Burrow for a long time. I'm sure there's some friendly locker room competition there too. It's just a very complex situation when you have to pay these young guys and you have a guy who, when you look at he's never really been an athlete guy. He's never popped off in some of those more objective tracking metrics where we're looking at speed and we're looking at burst and stuff like that. We have seen that tail down from even where he was. So maybe you try to make the call early. They've always been a pretty good drafting team, you know, in the last couple of years, and have stuck to their kind of guns in replacing these kind of guys. They tried to do it with Jesse Bates. Maybe you try to do that with Trey Hendrickson as well.
Stofsky coming up with the Joe Burrow stats there on the lower third there. So that's a lot to talk about the Bengals. I know that the Cardinals are in the mix in the NFC West because everybody is in the mix in the NFC West. It's such a weird division, right? Like a week ago, we were talking about selling off parts from the Rams, and then they beat the Vikings, and now you can't do that. You can't do that. Like we have all this stuff lined up to talk about Stafford and Cooper Kupp, and like they're not going anywhere because the division is so wide open. And to the degree that we're talking about 3 teams sitting there at 4-4 and the Rams at 3-4. Like, so everyone kind of has to stand pat there to a degree, but are there any pieces within that division, maybe in Arizona, that you think that you would like to see moved or you have a destination for? Why is Budda Baker on my list of things to talk to you about?
Yeah. Thomas mentioned kind of how like maybe we're moving more towards a basketball or baseball type situation. And the Bengals and the Cardinals are really that highlight of teams where you're like, okay, I get we've performed really well and it's a short window sport and you try to hammer it out of the park. But I have a guy who's getting paid a lot of money who I'm probably not going to keep next year. I look at that defense. There's not a ton of great pieces on that defense. David Collins has played pretty well, former Tulsa product. But there's a lot of people who want to compete that need kind of that all-in-one player to make themselves better. You look at the Cowboys right now, like really giving up tons and tons of yardage. You don't think Budda Baker, a player who, you know, misses tackles because no one else could even be in the realm of making that tackle, you don't think he could help the Cowboys right now, who have had tackling problems all year of just swarming to the ball? The Vikings also, like the
Don't
Vikings,
give him to the Cowboys.
the Vikings have Harrison Smith back there getting older. Like, could you imagine Budda Baker in a Brian Flores defense that has kind of started regressing the last 2 weeks? I just think
my love language here.
Yeah, I just think he's such an interesting player, and he brings so much that, you know, not all safeties can bring across coverage, run defense, playing in the box, playing high, that he's a player who could be a difference maker if the Cardinals, who may not want to pay him next year, you know, may not think they have the absolute juice on defense and want to really focus their team in on offense, maybe they decide to move him, and that could be, you know, a real win-win where they could get some serious value for him as well, particularly in the day 2, day 3 picks.
Thomas, I'd love to hear your reaction to that, because I think he makes so many good points. I also look at the Cardinals, and this is a team that's underperformed my expectations. I thought that they were a team that was maybe built to surprise some people this year. It's been kind of underwhelming, and you could argue maybe that it's moving in the right direction. Like this last week, the Cardinals offense in particular was better than I think that they've been for a little while. But Thomas, you've talked about that wariness. They're in the mix. Everyone is there.
They're in the mix. And you come back to an owner who has his conservative side, right? When you talk about the Bidwells, then you have Jonathan Gannon and you have Monty Ossenforth. That's not Monty's background to come in and just kind of move people. He's in his second year. He's a conservative general manager, though young. I just don't.
Because I think differently at the trade, like on draft day. On draft day, he's moving up and down the board.
All that age group is moving up and down because that's what they have to do. I'm saying in a situation like this, I've known Monty. He was on our staff. Like, Monty's personality is not one that's just going to move around flippantly and think. Not saying that you're suggesting that. I just think when you're in your second year and you're really trying to find your way as team builders, head coach, and general manager, how do you do that? I would never have done it then. Now, that was years ago, but I just don't know. And again, this is another, like Cincinnati, it's another organization in a different way that it doesn't seem like it's their style to do that. And Budda Baker would be great. To your point, you said, by the way, love language. Can you just expound on that? Because you love the Vikings so much?
Talking about like an exciting piece going to the Brian Flores defense, like it's just like, it gets me excited. It's like talking about Max Crosby to the Lions, right? Like these things where you're like, "Whoa, it would be so pretty." Yeah, that's all.
All I'm saying in the end is, and I say conservative in a complimentary way. He is a thought out, thoughtful person. I'm talking about Monty Ossenforth, the GM, and I think Jonathan Gannon. I mean, the way that they operate together, I just think they don't want to sell in that way and feel like they're selling a piece that is so important. Has it come out at all? There's been any interaction there that he wants out? Because maybe I'm missing the boat on this. No,
not that I've.
Yeah, he's just been a player to talk about, particularly because of that contract situation. Because it's, you know, they're a young team, and the interesting thing about the Cardinals too is obviously this is much smaller potatoes, but they made a trade, Rondale Moore, who you know wasn't super productive for them, but was a guy that, you know, Kyler Murray and Clayton Tune and the guys who have been throwing the ball around for them was targeting in the past few years. They did a player for player trade for him where they bring in Desmond Ridder, didn't end up working out. I wonder if that's like the move forward. That would be something. Typically we don't see that at the deadline. But if they are a little creative, you mentioned Monty Ossenforth in his second year, and he doesn't want to necessarily, you know, wait another year to compete. If he sees a place of interest that he really wants to improve, maybe a younger guy, maybe an unheralded guy that they had a good evaluation on, maybe that's the move they make, a player for player trade or player and picks trade, and kind of avoid, you know, the current downside of losing one of your better players.
Yeah, and I think losing one of your better players, this comes back to that, right, Lindsay? Like, I just can't stress it enough. When you're putting together a team and you know how important that foundational piece is, Those are difficult. And imagine you get a knock on the door and your owner comes in and says, we have a contract situation. We need to move this guy. And you guys are feeling a little edgy because you're not exactly where you want to be, to your point, and you're fairly new in it. Man, that is an uneasy feeling. Because do you fight back with all your might to say, no, we can't move on from this guy. We need to make this play on re-signing or wherever the contract might be for some of these complicated players. I guess this just comes back to what I'm saying. It's not easy in these situations. I don't see him going anywhere. You guys can call me out next show if that's the case.
Wait, I have breaking news. I'm just kidding. That would be incredible. All right. Well, I think those are all the major names that we wanted to talk about. Sam, do you have any other like smaller ones that you want to just get on the record because you're totally going to be right and the trade deadline's a week away?
Yeah, just to stick on the NFC West just real quick. The 49ers lost Javon Hargrave at the beginning of the season. They also have some other defensive tackles that are all out. The Patriots are one of the teams that, have been willing to let guys go. I'm interested to see what they do with Divine Godshow from another LSU product. But also of note, Belichick listed out that he didn't really necessarily like the way that they were calling some of those guys soft. He listed Uche. Uche gets sent out. He listed Godshow. Maybe Godshow gets sent out too. Just an interesting piece, particularly given where the Patriots are. I think he'd be a good fit with the 49ers. He's been a very good run defender this year. The 49ers have struggled in the pass and run defense, though they've still been successful. Interesting place to shore up. But that's really the only one I have on my radar.
It's so funny because we've talked so much about these big names and these big pieces. And then you have Joshua Uche and who I think your casual football fan is like, who is that? And what will he do for this team? And so I'm curious to see if those aren't some of the names that we start seeing going, right? Like some of these pieces that might upgrade an area of weakness, but it's not splashy and it's not the glaring need, but they're a player that is available for whatever reason because of depth purposes and on the team that they're on currently. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next week. And we will be here, by the way, with a live reaction show on trade deadline day, reacting to some of these moves, Thomas, see if we're right.
All of this said, Lindsay, I want to leave us with this, and this is you're not going to put me on the spot on this. I've said this before. I love trades. I love trades in draft time. This is a little uneasy for me because I never was really active during this time, and I understand it more and more as we're moving through. I am a big believer in trading for head coaches. It's a tee up for another time.
What? No, it's what? You can't just say I want to trade for a head coach and then just bye, guys.
It's not the time to talk about it. But when you start talking about trading and you start talking about getting legitimate pieces for your organization, and if you can find the right head coach that mixes well with your organization, with your ownership,
who
with
are
your
you
team,
fucking trading for, Thomas?
There are categorically, in my mind, probably 3 to 5 that I would consider. We're going to talk about it another time. I just want to put that out. I love the idea. After being in the league as long as I have been and having been out for 4 years, if I found the right situation and I were ever to be in that position again, I would think very, very strongly about how I could parcel something together to get the right head coach into the organization that I was with.
What is he talking about? You are the full-on guy, by the way, who's like, hey, I can't have this conversation now, but we need to have a very serious conversation tomorrow. Can you just think about it all night long and stress yourself out and then, but not now.
But this is not saying in any way right now, because you're going to lead down this. Wait a minute. Does that mean Thomas really thinks it was about Bill and not about Tom? That's not my point here.
How would somebody have to trade for Bill? Would people have to trade for Bill? Is this about Bill?
No, this is not about Bill. This is not about Bill.
Yeah, because he's not under.
No, I'm just saying back in the day, all the discussions about, is it about the quarterback or is it about the coach? What I'm saying is, and I've always felt both of those guys benefited from each other. This is a completely different conversation. And they both are amazing at what they've done. And that's why they got to where they got to. What I'm saying is, you're trying to kick off a new organization and you need the right people. You need to make sure that you look at all of these ideas of trading. We're in the middle of talking about trades.
Ben
You
Johnson.
need to
We're trading for Ben
seriously
Johnson.
talk about how you could acquire another time, another place, not trade deadline, how you could acquire for your organization if you were making a change. Not saying you have to do it, but you better.
So this isn't about anyone specific at the moment. You're just saying we're talking about trading, and I feel passionately about this.
They're talking about trading, and I'm talking about due diligence for organization, team builders, owners. That needs to be thought about deeply if you are that organization. And I am projecting, of course, that needs to make a change. And I think there are opportunities out there. It means heavy booty, again, to use that line. I get it.
I need names from you next week, or I can't do the show with you anymore. This is my threat to resignation. Threat for resignation. I'm just kidding, but you're toying with my emotions now. All right, so we're going to be back again next week. Tuesday is the trade deadline. We've already mentioned that. So we'll be here when the trade deadline passes. It's a 4 Eastern thing. Everything's 4 Eastern. I assume that the trade deadline's 4 Eastern, right? Stopsky? Yeah. I'm doing. Yep. Okay. So 4 Eastern. We're here. We're reacting to the moves that were or were not made. And this has been fun. And look, we had massive moves that were made while we were live here. Plus other breaking news. Sam Bruchhaus, you're awesome. Thank you for hanging with us for this entire time. Go listen to Sumer Daily, his daily podcast that he puts out from Sumer Sports here. Thomas Dimitrov, you guys all know you're the best. I'm Lindsay Rhodes. Thank you so much for being with us. If you're not already a subscriber to the podcast, in the podcast form, you can go listen to this whole conversation in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. It is the Sumer Sports Show. Bye, guys.